any questions after the session, feel free to ping me on Twitter. Now, before I start, I just wanted to make sure that I provide full credit to the session, to SharePoint Dev community. And most of my learning is from the Office and SharePoint PNP, and specifically Vesa and Chris Kent on doing excellent work on the column formatting and the view formatting front. So I have provided those links here. Those Twitter handles are clickable. I'll share my slide deck and you will be able to use that. Definitely follow them if you're not following them already. With that, also wanted to say thank you to all our sponsors. And again, you all know that these events would not be possible without these sponsors. So huge thank you to all the sponsors. Whenever you have time, please visit those channels and try and explore some of the products and see if that's something useful. So in agenda, as I said, we'll just very quickly note there's not too much slides. We'll just simply start with very quickly the classic experience today, SharePoint 2013, 16, 19, and we'll just jump on to the column formatting, and if time permitting, we'll look at the view formatting, and finally the Q&A. So conditional formatting, when it comes to classic way, you probably would remember that if you already passed that era or you're still doing it, you probably would be using something like client-side rendering, right? Like so JS link. So, or some of the users, power users, have seen using SharePoint Designer. Some devs have seen using custom field types. And so basically the idea here is we wanted to create some sort of conditional formatting. You wanted to have a project list and you wanted to show data based on specific condition. Now, the challenge was that when we move our SharePoint site from SharePoint Classic back in the days to SharePoint Online, there was no JS link, right? So that's one of the things that a lot of people didn't like. And then that's when Microsoft introduced column formatting, and column formatting and view formatting now has come a long, long way. Like from 2017, I believe, to today, it's that they have done a lot of improvements. But that's one of the things that you could use in SharePoint Online. So when it comes to, give me 1 second. So when it comes to column formatting, what is column formatting? So you can use column formatting to customize how your SharePoint list or SharePoint Online list and libraries are displayed. I'm using SharePoint Online because column formatting is currently supported SharePoint Online and SharePoint 2019, but those both use different schema. I'll talk about that when it goes. So you can use column formatting to customize how your fields in your SharePoint Online list and libraries are displayed. What you do is you actually construct a JSON object that describes the elements that are displayed when your field gets rendered. So elements, you mean what sort of div, would it be span, things like those elements gets displayed, and that's something you will configure as part of your constructing JSON object. And anyone who's new to JSON, you probably would hear this multiple times today. It's a JavaScript object notation, nothing but just key value pair, right? Like so, and I'll show you example. We'll start with very, very basic, and then we will take it further. But nothing but just the key value pair. You need to make sure that your keys and values follow the schema that Microsoft have defined. And as long as you're within that schema, it's a case sensitive, you would be able to construct this JSON objects very, very quickly. So once you create that JSON object and your view, once the fields gets rendered, it will display the styles that you have specified on those columns. Now, one that column formatting does not change the data in the list item or your document libraries. It just only changes how it's displayed when the field or column gets rendered or view gets rendered. Now, in terms of permission, anyone that has managed view in the list rights can create the column formatting for themselves. Now, some of the common nodes that you could use when it comes to column formatting are element type. So what type of element that you want to specify. I'm just only talking about some of the common one. Now, one of the important or crucial one that initially when I was using is a debug mode. Default is off. It's an optional one, but I prefer to use debug mode on initially because it just outputs there on your console. Then you can use attributes like styles and things, class, and then you can also use the operators and operands, like specify the type of operators that you can use and operands. Now, common element types that you could use are listed here: div, span. The key thing that I would also focus here is the button. You could do some of the interesting column formatting using the buttons as well. We'll talk at some of the examples today as part of this. Now, you could also today do column formatting or list view formatting without even writing a code, and we'll start with that first. So I'll show you what you could do today, and I'm assuming that you're new to this. This is where we will start. You will see what you could do today, and then we'll just for a few minutes we'll park that. If you wanted to just learn how that works behind the scene, we'll go from very beginning scratch, and then we'll get started with that. Okay, so with that, let me just jump on to the demo. And so this is, let's go here. Let me see if I can zoom it a little bit more. Okay, so we'll leave it there. Now, to start with, as I was mentioning, that you could today do the column formatting and view formatting without even writing the code. So to do that, there's multiple ways that you can do that, but you could go for the views, and then under all items at the bottom here is a format current view. The format view has two options, format view, and when you click format columns, but default, you will get the title column, and then you can pick a column. So that's one way to just pick a column formatting. If you wanted to format a column, you can pick predefined ones and edit the row styles or manage rules for your conditions, things like that. I'll show that in different lists because I don't have multiple rows here. But if you're just only interested in column formatting, you could just go to the column settings and then pick format this column. And here you could also, as I said, by default, it's just the same window here and just defaults to format column tab rather than go from the view defaults to format view tab, which is again a great improvement from where it started initially. Now to look at this, you could just simply pick this out of the box one. You can customize some of these styles here. Actually, let me just cancel this and then go to another list where you can just pick a good example, and we'll just say format column. Then you can pick out of the box. I'm not going to touch anything, but you could just pick some of the styles and close, and you can see that you could just do that styling based on the status yourself without writing code. So if you don't want to write any code and you're just happy with something that works out of the box, there are some options for you. One of the other examples you could also do is you can edit the styles. Like you can do, like as you can see, that is simple text, and you can click more styles, and you would be able to add icons, font colors, font size, like all sort of formatting that you could do on that style yourself. Now, behind the scene, when you make those changes, as you can see that if I would go to the column formatting, behind the scene, when you go to the advanced mode, that's the code that gets generated for you, right? So you're not writing this code, and you're new to this, so you probably would not want to start just looking at that code and then say, okay, how do I go about replicating that? And that's why the idea of this session was to, okay, how do you, if you're new to this, how do you get started with this? But if you, I also wanted to make sure that you have these options out of the box, that if you don't want to write any of this code yourself, you could just simply use some of these options here. But I highly recommend that you do go through the journey of learning this yourself. and understand what options you have when it comes to formatting your columns, or eventually in the view, a list view column, right? So to start with, let's just look at the column. So we'll start with this column here, and then we'll start formatting this column. To write your own code, you will just simply go into the advanced mode. I would walk you through with the simplest way of doing it, and we'll look at some of the tooling at the very end. So to start with, let me just go back to my code sample. So as I was mentioning, the first thing that you will need to specify here is the key, the JSON, that object that you would be creating, you need to specify schema. And then there's two separate schema, as I said, for SharePoint Online. That's a default schema for SharePoint Online. All the examples that I would be using here would be using SharePoint Online. But if you're using SharePoint 2019, there's a different schema. There are some differences on SharePoint 2019 version that you will probably see. And when it comes to view formatting, there's a different schema for that too. So for the first, that's how, if you're new to JSON, that's like key here is a schema, and then the value is what's the schema URL there or endpoint. Then what we are doing in this example is we are specifying element type. We look at some of the common elements, and what we would be, the key here would be then the element type. Value would be like div. So you'd want to inject a div, and then what would be the value that you want to display. Now that's where the first special field, if you will, that comes into play. If you wanted to reference in your current field and again, you pay attention to what we are into. So we are currently in the column formatting. When you use @ current field, that will give you your current field and value, if you will. And I'll actually go into the details for special type of fields as well. So what we are doing here is injecting a div, and then there's a text content, which is again what you want to display in that div. We are using a special key, if you will, is the current field. Current field would get you, if it's a text field, will get you the text value of that field, and then you will see that it gets displayed as is, whatever the value was there. Now, anything that you're seeing in this example here, everything is case sensitive. So you need to be very, very careful whenever we use any of these keys or special values here. Everything is case sensitive. So if I would just go and then do that, that's not going to work, and that's just would be displayed as @ current field, right? So you just want to make sure that you're using case sensitive code. So we'll just simply copy that. We'll go to our formatting here. So we'll just paste it, and then let's just preview it. Now you will not see any difference, but if you wanted to see a difference, what we will do is we will just simply replace that with, say, then preview it, and then it will display. Now you may argue that we are changing the value. We are not changing the value here. We are just simply changing what gets rendered on the client side. The backend value at the moment, backend value doesn't change. So, and this is just to show you that what you could do when it comes to overriding the styling of the column. But the key thing to remember here is that current field gives you, for the text column, gives you the text of that or value of that column. Now that becomes interesting or challenging when you have a special type of fields like a people or person field or lookup columns, because those are actually, when you use the current field key, it returns an object. An object can have then more values or more properties that you could use. So for example, if I would go to assign to, which is a person field, we'll just format column here, go to advanced mode. And if I would just simply go back to my code here, and then let's just see what happens. We'll just copy that and paste just as is without doing anything. We'll just save it, and let's see what happens. See, that's just because that it returns an object, it doesn't understand current object and it just tells you that it's an object. So to get the value out of object, what you need to specify which properties you want to leverage, and then some of the values that, again, before I write down, for person field or how some of these values are properties that you could use. So default title would get you the title actual name, but you could also use some of these other properties that if you wanted to, let's say, get the email instead of displaying just the title, you will just use .email, and then when you preview, save it, you will get the email. So you get the idea. When it's an object, you would need to specify, when you're using a current field, you need to make sure that you are specifying which properties you actually want to use. Same thing with the lookup columns. The lookup column would, I'm not going to just go and keep pasting those, but for lookup columns, you would be using something like lookup value. So right now, when you go here, and you can see that you can click Ontario, and then that will take you to the lookup value of that field. But if I would have to format that, and then we'll do, say, lookup value and save it. And then, so now that you just get the value, you just overwrite that field, and formatting, then use your own styling, and then now it's no longer clickable. So just a very, very basic, you get the idea that if you ever wanted to just override the column to reference that specific column, you will start with current field, remember the key, and as we continue going, as much as time permits, I'll continue guiding some of these special fields that you could use. Now, to move on to the next phase, so now let's just look at here. Let me just talk about format. So we'll just save it. So now, if you, especially like in many examples that I've seen working with clients, they wanted to have styles created for based on a specific status column on a list or library or what have you, or based on the date field, what they wanted to do. Now, any of these, so you would typically want to use an if condition. Now, if you're new to, and again, this is just based on my experience, I think when you're new to, you can do formatting and comparison two ways. You could use an Excel-like if formula, or you can use operators and operands. Initially, I would suggest that if you're very new to this, the Excel-like formulas probably would be much simpler to follow. And then eventually you can expand that to use operators and operands. But to mention, like just to give you an example, if you wanted to use an if condition in Excel, you would just simply be if and then your condition. Then if the condition is true, what the value, so you will just simply say whatever the true value is, and then if it's false, what's the false value? So what you wanted to display there. So that's the if condition, right? So you will say if status is equal to done, then if it's done, what you want to do, that will go here. And then if it's not done, what will happen here? So that will go here. But most of the time you would be needing to do nested ifs, right? So you will start with if condition, true value. Oh, it's not true, then you move on to the next. And the way you will do it in that case, you will create a nested if condition. So if, and now again, condition, true value, and then false value. So I'll just, so now we nested this if. So basically, you just continue nesting that until you get your all the ifs conditions ready. So that's similar formula that we would be using for next example. So as you can see that what we are doing here is we are just simply, again, the key value schema, we're injecting a div. Now, we are adding an attribute called class, right? So we wanted to use and predefine classes. Now, when it comes to class, if you haven't heard that all of this front-end framework for SharePoint and Microsoft 365 is it's an official Office UI fabric. All the classes icons that you would be using would be part of that. So you can't just inject your own classes. Of course, you could use a custom code for that, something like that, but something like column formatting and view formatting, you would be referring existing Office UI fabric framework, web framework, and then using all those classes. So in this case, what we are doing is we are injecting element div, and then when it comes to class, so let me just spell this. So instead of just statically saying, so a class would be this, what we are doing is we are adding an if. So condition if, and then that's the condition here, current field equals done. And because the drop down is again the same as I say the a text field sort of field, you could just simply use the current field, and you're just comparing it with a specific value. If it's done, what do you want to do? You wanted to have that div a class, and then we'll say SP field severity good. That's the class that you want to assign. But if it's not done, what else you want to do? So again, that goes back to nesting, and then it just keeps going. So if I would just take that much code here, so let me just try and show you. If I would just take that much code here, and I'll try and rebuild it well inside this column here. We'll just go to the advanced mode. So we are working with the status column, and so again, the schema, the element type div, and then we are here under attributes. So after specifying a class, I think it's, and again, always keep an eye here at the bottom. Please enter valid JSON schema, because we are missing, I believe, a curly bracket. Now, if I would just, let me see if I could reduce it here. Okay, if I would just leave it there and then preview it, you will see that, yes, the class is getting applied, but there's nothing getting displayed. And the reason for that, and again, is because we have specified div, but we haven't specified what the text value would be. Like, what's the value that you want to display in that column, right? So there's multiple ways you can do it. You can be fancy, but if you just want it to be pretty simple, you just do comma, and then just like how we had the text field value here, just like when I go back to my sample, the text content, you need to specify the text content if you wanted to. You could just simply go back to that, and then you can say content. I will just say, and then let's say, and now when you preview it, you get all your values back. Now you get your values back. But now what you have done on top of those values is you have specified some styling. And for styling, all you did compared to the first example that we saw is that you've just added an attribute and then attribute as class. You specify the class, and the class, as I said, is using if conditions based on the value of that field, and then it's using those predefined classes, and then that gets you this. You could be, and again, you could be get more fancy on this here. I'm not going to be in too detail, but what in the further, if you wanted to expand that further, what you could do is you could see that there's a children that you've added here, and then by doing that, you have basically added some span, then you have added some padding, and after that, we have added an icon. An icon name is also, as I said, predefined icons on Office UI Fabric, same concept as the top one, specifying a class, and then you could just simply use the if condition. So if I would just take this code as is and paste it, it would be much nicer looking status field. As you can see that there's some padding, there's some icon, and rest we already saw that we added specify the class and the text. So you get the idea that you could use some of these if conditions to further add your own logic as to what you want to do with that. Now, when it comes to to see the next example, that's where the second thing to remember. Now, we already talked about text, like special field is a current field, but sometimes when we're looking at the column formatting here, the column formatting is based on your entire row. So it's not always that you're working on the status. You only want to reference to that column. But what I wanted to do is that, let's say, instead of status column, I wanted to highlight the title to red or green based on what's the due date, right? So as you can see, all these due dates are all in the past. And if I wanted to reference due date to format my title or my status, how would I go about doing it, right? So for doing that, what you would do is you would use the square bracket, then the $sign, and the column internal name. Now this is very key, important point, that this is the internal name and not just your, just to make it simpler, I have called my column due date without spaces, but many times I've seen, not many times, almost all the times I've seen users when create the columns, they add a lot of spaces, and the spaces are for anyone who's been with SharePoint for a long time knows that it's not good for your internal names. And if I wanted to give you an example, let me see if I can so I've sorted this by that field here, and I think that's why I've added that field. You see the sort field here, that's the internal name. You can see that I've sorted that hello world, and you can see that sort field, and it might be a little tiny at the top right now, but you see it's been replaced by _x0020 underscore, and that's your internal name. So if I would have to use or reference that hello world, oh, so Chris, thank you. Column using this view will not put the spaces in your internal names. Thank you for correcting, Chris. But the key thing here to remember is that when you're using, got it. Thank you. So key thing to remember when using other fields, just make sure that you're referencing other. You could also reference other fields while using a column formatting on a different column. But to remember, it's a square bracket, $sign, and whatever the internal name of that column is. So if I wanted to use this again, saying just to show an example, all we had against nothing. You're just taking steps. Same thing. You're adding a div. Text content of div would be the current field. But this time you are just simply adding a style of color, and then that's conditional if due date is less than equal to now. That's the second or third special field. Now will give you the current date and time. When it comes to now, you could also use other to your locals, and you can get some of these other details as well, but to simplify it for now, we'll just simply use add now, and then true value, and then false value. Don't do nothing, like anything here. So we'll just simply take that example, and if we would just go back to same status column and format it, I'll go back to advanced column, preview it. Because they're all, just to prove my point, they're all in the past. If I would go and then edit a specific column or a row, and I'll just simply change the due date to say, I'll just say Friday and then 14th. We don't want Friday, November the 13th, so we'll just simply save it. And then you can see that it's been changed. So we in the status column formatting, we are just referencing a due date. And the two things to note here is just you're using a different column. You can always reference any column in that specific row, and you need to, by using the internal name, and you also can use now as your date time comparison operator as well. Now, to move further, Any questions so far? And again, I don't have to be worried because, as I said, the person that has been instrumental in me learning all this is right here with us, Chris Kent. And we will see one of the greatest tools that he built in 5-10 minutes. But if you have any questions, feel free to post in a chat. Chris, I would appreciate if I'm not looking at the questions, if you could just reply to them in the chat. That would be helpful. If not, I'll take care of those at the very end. With that, moving on. Now same thing when it comes to the view formatting. Now, let me just very quickly switch to the slides. Now, when it comes to view formatting, and I'm not going into there's minor differences when it comes to column formatting, or few differences. First thing to remember, there's a different schema for view formatting. When you use view formatting, you have to reference this view formatting using a different schema. Now, view formatting, you can do multiple ways. One, you could just simply use additional row class. And what that means is, if I would go here back to here and use my format this column, and I'll just use alternate row styling and just save it. And another thing, it's a great example. Your view formatting doesn't override your column formatting. So your column formatting is already there, and what you have done is you have added a view level formattings where your column or rows are alternatively styled. So when I go back to my view formatting and go to advanced mode, as you can see that it's using additional row class. And again, it's using operators and operands, but you could still stick with your standard if condition. So as I was mentioning, this is a different example here. So this is for the view example, additional row class, and for we are just using if condition just like Excel, and then we are changing the row color based on the due date. So if I would just simply take this as is, go back to my code here, and what I've done here is just added a view formatting, and when using view formatting, I'm using additional row class, and that's where my slide is, because when you come to view formatting, then you could use row formatter or additional row class. You can't use both, and row formatter would give you lots of flexibility. Additional row class is just like in case you just wanted to apply some sort of styling at the row level. Now, when you use both, for example, I would use row formatter and additional row class, or your row formatter would take the precedent, and then additional row class, whatever you've been doing there would not be would be respected. So now, when you use the row formatter, you have other options that you could take advantage of. It's like hide selection. So sometimes when you are working on a view where you wanted to change them to you wanted to change the view, the way it looks, and you wanted to not have users select. So you could hide selections, and you can also hide column headers as well. So some of the views you could hide column headers. When it comes to styling, you could also use now, I think it's new that just recently noticed, there's a tile props. Sorry, I'm not keeping up to date on this one, but I've also noticed that there's tile props that you could also use to have a specific tile level styles applied to your view. To see the example, as I said, one of the option is to just simple additional row class. And additional row class, if you would go with out of the box, you could just say format this column and format this view, or just switch to design view. And then you could either use alternate, or you could say, you know what, I'm just going to use the conditional formatting. And then here you would add a rule to say if the due date is greater than or less than, or greater than or less than today, you will just simply have the entire row formatted. So that's the additional row class example. If you wanted to take a look at some of the other example. I'm not going to go into the detailed, but let me try and explain you. So what this example, this is again an MSDN example that I'm just going to show you. What we are doing here is we are using row formatter instead of additional row class. And we have set height selection to true and hide column headers to true. So both would be true. And when it comes to row formatter, all it's doing is it's just injecting a div and then adding an attribute class. And the class again would be using is the SP row card. So it will just display a card type of styling for your div. And underneath there's the children, another div it gets added, and the text content of that div would be the title of whatever your title field is. So as you can see that it's just, instead of current field, you could also reference a field using the square bracket dollar, the internal name. And then there's other fields that it's adding. So div, the title, another div for feedback. And again, when it comes to feedback, let me just show you my list here. So it's a simple list, has a title field, feedback column, and then assigned to. So I'm using administrator account here right now. And then so if I wanted to change it to, and that's exactly what we are referring in this code here, that display title and then feedback, we are referencing feedback. And there is also, we are going to be injecting a button. When we inject a button, we wanted to specify what action we want to do. And now there's you could do like up to different 4 actions. You could have a default click, you can do share, believe you could also start a flow, and then I think edit. These actions you could do with the button. And if I would just simply show you in that example here, my default view is currently set to that. So what, and I'm going to example furthermore. So as you can see that my SP row card class that gets you this card styling, there's no headers. I can't just select anything here at the column level, but there's also a button that gets added, give feedback. But there's no give feedback on my second item, and that's because the second item is not assigned to me. And so there's a logic when it comes to the button, when we add the button, we add the style to the button. And what we are doing is, again, this is an example, operators and operand. What we are doing is we are comparing me to assigned to email. So me returns like, is the email the same? So is it the same person that is currently logged in and the item is assigned to them? Then the style is nothing. But if that person is not the same, and so in this case, the second item, I'm not the same person, what it will do is it will just assign a style display to none. And so it will just simply hide it. So that's the reason we are not seeing anything at the second level or second column. And when it comes to button, the action for that button is a default click. So when I click on give feedback, whatever happens at an item level, when you click on that item, that's a default click that gets added. So, or you could also have the same window display on a button click. So if you wanted to have a share, you could do that as well under default click. So these are some of the examples. I have just 10 minutes left. I also wanted to touch base on some of the tooling piece. So so one of the things that, or one of the tool that I've started with initially is obviously VS Code. But whenever I talk about Visual Studio Code, as soon as it starts with Visual Studio, most of the business users or power users like, no, they don't want to touch. But this is one of the wonderful tools because it does have, once you have the schema added, it does have the IntelliSense. You could just control a space bar and it will display all the IntelliSense options that you could use. And again, still my go-to tool for many of these things. So definitely that you should consider this. The second tool that interim when I'm in the browser and I wanted to make something quick and dirty changes to the field level, is what I've used is the Chrome extension. If you use the Chrome, there's an extension SP Formatter. So what you could do is you could just enable that, and when you go to the column formatting and advanced mode, you would have something that you could just simply, and then then you can do schema, and then you can just start typing. So I'll just give you an example here. If I would go to an existing column, column formatting, format this column, you would have all the options, just like, as I say, the intelligence and everything that we were talking about. It will also tell you if there's an error, and then you can just pick everything that's right inside the browser. So as long as you have, and I personally would not recommend using personally for every single thing. I've always relied on this for most of the quick and dirty. I just wanted to make something and I wanted to try it out rather than going and starting a new tool. I would rely on that, but my recommendation personally is, as I say, and you will see why I'm saying this. I've always, now that one of my favorite tools is, we will see here, and Chris is here, so it's a column formatter. If you ever, after all this pandemic is over, and if you ended up ever using column formatter, make sure that you buy Chris at Ring. It's an amazing tool. Just wanted to show you that it's just a web part that you will actually, and there's a package available on a GitHub. You could just drop that into your tenant, and then web part would be available for you to start creating column formatting. So you could start by just simply new, and the advantage of this is when you go to the column types, you have all the options here. So if I would just pick choice as an example, it decides that it's a type of column. Based on that, it will give you an option to start with a template, so existing template. So if you wanted to run a flow based on a specific condition or things like that, you will have some default template, or you could start from scratch. If you just wanted to write your own stuff, you could start from scratch. But I'll just simply say, I'll show you. So when I pick start from a template, you will see some default values. And so these are some of the default values. And then you have option to format if you wanted to show value icon. And then you could also just look at this, look at the code that gets generated, modify anything that you wanted to modify, and see the preview right inside here. And so all that, it's just in one place. You could just start working on your code, build it. And the beauty is when you're done writing, there is an option to save as, and then you can download it. And that's what I've done many times. I would just download it, save it, and then reuse it for some other purposes. So because you could just simply, you don't have to write everything from scratch. You could just simply download, save, and then modify it for something. But one thing that I really like, because most people, when you talk about the column formatting, they think like they're just working directly at the list or library columns. But the key thing is you should, if you're formatting, there's site columns, you should also consider leveraging reusing some of those. It can apply this directly to the site columns. So I can pick, and that's why I say like you can pick a base column, and then I'll say categories as a text, and it has push changes to the list option as well. So if you're using that, and thank you, Chris, that's an amazing stuff. But I'm very excited to use this tool. It's something that everyone should have, because it gives you lots of options, not just building it, but also to deploy to your list column, to your site columns, and even to save a copy. So something that I've quite used to using now And I've always recommended this to many of my customers as well, where if they are worried about Visual Studio, they can just simply use this as part of as part of their creating that formatting for list and column formatting here. So something that you should consider, that when it comes to tooling, there are various options, but my recommendation, as I said, if you, and because you could always start from open, right? Because if you would save it to your library, you can just pull and then open and start from that point on. So this will give you lots of flexibility when in writing a code. With that, let me just see if I have some references. I'm going to share some of these, I'll share my slide deck that you will get all the options here. Make sure that, and again, I think Chris wasn't here. I wanted to make sure that, that you guys do follow the SharePoint PNP, Vesa and Chris. You will hear like lots of great stuff, lots of great demos every month, and you would learn a lot. With that, there's a couple of slides that I wanted to talk about. That please join Microsoft 365 Chicago in supporting public schools through Children First Fund. You can direct donation it or join a raffle, 50-50. There are $20 ticket and then split pot with the charity and then end of the day. So please consider this. And here's the raffle codes, and then here's a direct donation code that you could use. And finally, the moment of truth. If you wanted to help me, please make sure that you provide some feedback, what you learned, what you think that I could improve or perform better in terms of as a speaker. That would be very, very helpful. So please take some time and provide the feedback for this session. With that, I'll just thank you everyone again and conclude the session. I'll answer any questions if there are any, and if not, I'll leave the 10 minutes for other speaker to set up and get ready.